Hello, dear participants. Welcome to the session on energy systems. My name is Pascal Costa. I'm professor at CentraleSupélec, University Paris-Saclay, France. So I will share this session. We will have three presentations on very different topics. The impact of intermittent renewables on the electricity system, power system, on also storage issues, then the challenges on long run innovations and the question of their value or valorization, and the changes in consumer habits. So these are highly prospective and relevant subjects for the future of the electricity, power, and energy systems. So now I would like to remind you just a few rules so that everyone can present in the best possible conditions. Each presentation should not last for more than 22 minutes, or 23 minutes, followed by 8 minutes of questions and discussions. So our first paper today is entitled Beyond Cost Reduction, a new method to improve the value of technologies in energy systems, by Maximilian Parzen, University of Edinburgh. So, Emilian, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Pascal, for this wonderful introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
So, 1 second. All right. Yeah, as Pascal introduced me already, I'm from Edinburgh. I'm doing a PhD there, and just have a preprint out there called Beyond Cost Reduction, improving actually the value of energy storage. But I think also this method which I'm presenting today can be generalized for other technologies. So before we start really a little introduction, let's figure out what's like the cost and work relation. So I was actually recently reading a bit Karl Marx, a fantastic German philosopher actually, really nice writing style. And what he wrote is that something costs because like someone needs to work for it. So we have air, for example. It's really abundant. We don't really need to work for it to get air, right? On oil, for example, in the case of oil, we just had to dig in, for example, Saudi Arabia a little bit, and oil was coming out of a well. So there was also not much work, and that's why there was no little cost assigned to it. And then we have, for example, solar PV. We have difficult processes involved with that to generate like cells, and that's why something generally costs more, because someone needs to work harder for it. And just as a little easy start, I thought about it, like, what is life? And for me, also while I'm reading, while I was reading this Karl Marx book, I think it's really a multi-objective function, giving also a bit optimization into it. So in a way, like what we all want to achieve is that our future generations should work less or have more time, and that can be associated to minimizing total costs. Then on another way, also we want to maximize health, we want to maximize happiness, or nature. And I think what's a nice example, what we are now pricing in is like externalities of renewables, right? And that can be actually translated to future work, which we expect because of damages. And that's maybe also nice to have in mind. It's just like future work we are trying to account for. So moving now to value. For us, we defined that an energy technology is valuable if it lowers the total system cost. So that's really assigned, like connected to this objective which we mentioned before. And the technology assessment is actually really important in this context. So what is valuable? Like, what technology is valuable? That's a really striking question, right? So, and when we find and assess technologies, we should, people ask themselves, okay, what technology should I invest in? It could be like the researcher, can be the manufacturer, or even the policy supporter, right? And uses of that, I mean, I listed some of them, could be Siemens, Acer, TSO, or governments. So technology assessment, I was looking on different kind of methods which are applied in industry at the moment. We have actually 3 different groups: cost analysis, which really focus on minimizing the cost, but on a really small scale, just looking on the technology. For example, the PV cell, reducing the PV cell cost. Then other people looking on the profit analysis, where they maximize for specific profit projects, the profit. And then there's a third category, is the system value analysis. So what so far people did is they were looking on maximizing the benefit. And the category I'm presenting today, which we thought about and could make sense and would be useful to apply, is the market potential indicator, which really tries to minimize the total system cost. And none of this methodology worked properly before to suggest what really technology reduces the total system cost, which I just previously mentioned is really important. And when we look on really well-used cost matrices like the LCOS for energy storage, is like similar as the LCOE. They really talk about, okay, that minimum LCOS like shows some kind of competitiveness, and we're really talking about this metrics and saying, okay, that one technology is more competitive because it has a minimal cost than the other. But I think it's not, and that's what we see, is not really working that well. And we show that today by a small energy case study, energy storage case study, and we account for values of energy arbitrage and seasonal reserve provision. So how does energy system modeling work? They generally minimize yearly system costs, and that are consist of analyzed capital cost, so what I need to invest, and then the marginal cost for operating these units. And what the models are doing, they constrain basically what is possible by adding physics. So for example, I cannot produce as much as I want. I can just, to have a stable grid, it should just produce as much as it is needed. So energies meet the energy demand. I must meet transmission constraints. There's a certain availability of solar, wind, which is geographically different. I have a capacity constraint per region. I have a CO2 constraint. I think that's now in the face of the climate change and the greenhouse gas emission really relevant. And then I also have some kind of dispatchability differences depending on what technology we're looking at. So physics are one thing, and then realistic data is another thing. And the tool we are using for the study is Pipes Euro. It's a workflow to build a model from open data. So it covers the NSOE area and contains a lot of data from power plants to electrical demand, availability of this different generators. We also have a real environmental data on solar and wind situations. And that's what we all include to get some kind of a realistic representation of the energy system. What we did in our study is we were adding technologies. We added electrolysis, and so basically we added hydrogen technologies and battery and one lithium-ion battery. For the hydrogen technologies, we actually divided our categories in like a low and high hydrogen storage case, high LCOS storage case. So we had basically different technologies. So for electrolyzer, in the low LCOS case, we figured out alkaline is included, and for the fuel cell is the PEM fuel cell. And for the high LCOS case, it's the solid oxide electrolyzer, and the same as a fuel cell. And then just a benchmark, we had this battery inverter. So we added investments, lifetime data, efficiency, discount rate for each technology, and also like the energy related components. So what we figured out is actually, okay, looking on just the LCOS, we found out, okay, the battery is definitely the cheapest one. And then we figured out, okay, there's another low LCOS case, which I just mentioned with the different technologies. And they actually differ from this high LCOS case about like 5 cents per kilowatt. So what you would think logically is, okay, there's a really good reason maybe that the low LCOS technology is the preference. Maybe that's the technology I should develop. But we see in a bit that's not really always the case. So we were doing static LCOS is like a simple calculation with LCOS. We simplified every kind of node, like we put them together, aggregate into one case, right? And here we have 181 cases. So if we look on the LCOS here, that's the y-axis, then we have here the 3 different cases: low LCOS, high LCOS case, and the battery unit case. Here, just as comparison, the static values, static costs. What we can see here is also the full load hours. Okay, here we have little full load hours, it's darker. Here's lighter, more full load hours. And then we have market potentials. And the market potential is really the value which is assigned, which the optimization model thinks is a technology which is really worth to invest for this minimum total system cost case. So if we look on this data, talking about one single LCOS is really misleading because we have actually a wide range of LCOS. And just to really clarify, like each of this point is one of this kind of dots in Europe where we calculated the LCOS. So that are the dots here. So we have really a wide span, really wide span. And assuming constant full load hours, which is usually used in this LCOA studies, is also dangerous because we have here also a wide range from 200 to 800, 300 to 1,200 full load hours, and battery storage is also varying a lot. But what is crucial here is that we have a market potential that exists for all kind of technologies here. And it doesn't matter if it's low LCOS, high LCOS, or a battery unit. And that's really the thing, like the striking point, because it means that all technologies lead to a lower system cost. So from that sense, which I just, in combination with this introduction, it makes actually absolutely sense to invest in all of these technologies when we're listing it there. So why do we assess the LCOS? Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. It was
Hello?
just like it was just some background noise. Don't worry, it's okay.
Okay. So and what we introduce here is then the market potential method to guide innovation. And as you just saw before, it's just the market size, which is optimized by the energy model. And what we basically say, okay, look at a set of probable scenarios, assess these technologies, and then make a decision. And this decision should be also some kind of systematically. That's why we introduce also the market potential criteria. to make this kind of decision, and decisions are actually often subjective in a way, and you will see why. Here's the example of the market potential criteria. So a general rule is that if you don't have any technology, or if there's no technology optimized in the model, the technology is unlikely to be valuable in this specific scenario. That's market potential indicator 0. If it's higher than 0, it's likely to be valuable. If it's higher than 0 in multiple scenarios, and there's multiple probable scenarios, the uncertainty reduces. And we have actually some more subjective rules. For example, a company can say, I want at least a market potential of 2 gigawatts to invest in this technology, because they have a higher risk if it's not so big my market, right? And here comes also the rule into the game that bigger is better. The more market I have as a company, the more interesting is this technology in general. So when we look here on an example, it's not based on real data, but we have 4 technologies, we have 3 different scenarios. When we have a 0 market potential, this technology is not likely to be valuable. If it's plus, it's likely to be valuable, and even better if it's a lot of pluses there. Here we actually canceled out one plus, because we said, okay, maybe that's like my threshold rule. I'm not reaching 2 pluses. Everything below 2 pluses is like out of the game. And that's like the simple rule and that is really a matter of how companies or industry choose to handle these decisions. So we applied that same method in our case for 3 different scenarios. We changed a bit the technology representation, and that's why we have 3 different scenarios. And one was actually related to fixed energy to power ratio. So it means practically that we are not sizing any kind of storage flexibly. But in fact, with, for example, redox flow batteries or hydrogen technologies, we are flexible with sizing technologies. We can size the charger different to the storage tank or to the discharger. And that's what we included here in this variable energy to power ratio. And here in this hydrogen hub ratio, we actually mixed a bit the hydrogen technology. So looking on the 3 scenarios and all this kind of different technology, electrolyzer, fuel cells, and batteries, we actually found out that the solid oxide fuel cell, which was in the high LCOS ratio, is really a good one. So this is not a bad technology at all. It's actually optimized to like with 95 gigawatts in Europe in our 100% renewable case. So I think that's where you see that, okay, LCOS doesn't work probably. The technology is really good in all kind of scenarios. So the alkaline electrolyzer seems actually to prefer to work with the solid oxide fuel cell. That's another thing we saw. So you should actually mix maybe these 2 technologies. And the results also suggest that high cost technology can be equally or more valuable, which means, as I said, that the LCOS is kind of incomplete. Okay, now let's relax and consume that a bit. Now people might think, okay, that 2 are models, they are not always right, and actually they can never be right. If we look in the future is always uncertain. In a way, modeling can improve. We can include other values. For example, in energy storage, there are different kind of services we provide. We can include more sectors. We can add more technologies. Okay, 1 second. There's a big upgrade. All right, I think now it should work again. We can add more technologies. We can improve the data situation. We can put better data into this model. We can expand to new regions, adding nonlinear effects, and improve also the energy market representation, because the market doesn't really work as perfect as we think. But one key point is here that modeling can at least improve, and these other methods actually they have this flaw in the method itself. It can be also sometimes, I'm not saying that LCS is not always good, sometimes it can be good, but in like especially seasonal storage technologies or other technologies, it might be worth to additionally consider this kind of market potential. And one really key message, what you should take away is that lower cost is not equal higher value. We heard that like a couple of years ago from Leon Hurt as well. He was actually an inspiration to this work here. He tried also to come up with a method. I wasn't so convinced by that, and that's why we develop the market potential method, which is not something crazy from the methodology, right? We're just looking at what technology is deployed, but we figured out in our paper and write it down why we're doing that and why other methods have problems and limitations, and why maybe this method could add some extra features. Looking to applications of the market potential and some future work. So where you can use the market potential method is really to give technology design recommendation. You can say, okay, what storage is good? Is it a wind generator? Is it a low wind generator or high wind generator, which is good? Where should I place my assets? What is the value of demand response? How should I design demand response? Evaluating also energy technology market potential. So how big is my market for each technology? That's the stuff I can really do with this metrics method that we develop. And that's key, I think, for business decision. Future.
Sorry,
yeah.
Maximilian, to interrupt you. We just finished the time of presentation. Thank you very much. I don't know if you have like you can wrap it up.
Yeah, if you give me 1 minute.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, of course.
I just want to mention that we are working with a team now on expanding our model to Africa, just to give this worldwide view of the market potential, because a company just doesn't want to look at one continent. They want to, in the best case, look globally. And we're starting with adding now Africa to this model. And the project just started recently. We are more than 13 mostly PhD students working on that. I have 10 advisors, and if you're interested in the project, just look it up. And that's it. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maximilian. Thank you very much. So this first presentation was very nice, and it was very clear for me. I think there will be many questions, and I can see at the end of Rodica. So I give you the floor, Rodica, for the first question.
Okay, so good morning. Thank you, Monsieur da Costa. So thank you, Maximilian, for this very nice, clear presentation from your sunny corner. First of all, I would like to be sure your LCOS is based on the energy discharge. Is that so?
Can you
do you have a form? So your levelized cost of storage is based on the energy discharge only. Is that so?
Yes, I can show you the equation.
Okay, so I'm waiting for the formula, but how different in this case, how different is this LCOS from the classical LCOE, from the traditional LCOE? How different is this? Where storage is accounted for?
Yeah, it's not much different. So practically what we do with LCOE is looking at discounted costs.
Yeah, thank you. So could you please go back to the slide where you have modeling LCOS in 4D that I found very, very interesting and useful. So I don't expect much improvements with more sectors and so, but probably exploiting better these slides. So how can we adapt LCOS to this discharge and seasonality and storage? Because no surprise, battery is more competitive in any case, but we don't have the seasonality. Long-term storage, it's only for hydrogen and what you have here. So how can we improve market valuation based on this?
In our scenarios, we were looking in a 100% renewable energy scenario. And I think energy modeling tools can actually help what will happen with the future market. And I think we see, like in many regions and countries, that our marginal price, if we have a lot of renewables, is actually close to zero, and can be also negative. And that effect actually can be compensated or by adding some kind of energy storage. But it's a really challenging thing to really add our insights to the real market.
I mean, what is the market segment which could value the number of days we store the energy? You know, it's like in the hotel, we pay the number of nights and not only going out. So how can we do that for storage? The number of hours we store, because it's a value of staying there, being filled in. And that's my last question.
I'm not sure if I fully understood the question, but I think it's really, if arbitrage works, then basically the storage will work in this case. So if we have a lot of renewables, and in many countries energy storage use makes more sense.
Yeah, but arbitrage is then you have more incentives to make daily basis trade-offs, but not long-term, like 1 week, 6 months. So in this case, we need something to value the number of days of storage. So I would like to think, how can we have instead of energy discharge?
Okay, I think I got it. Yeah.
Okay.
So what we have, so we don't have an energy only market in Europe. I think not in most cases, right? So we have a kind of capacity and energy market. So this is really something which, we can never reach its high prices of 1,000 or more euros per kilowatt hour, which is needed to cover this costs which a long-term storage needs to earn at some point. And that's how actually in an energy-only market, energy arbitrage could also work for, let's say, longer seasons if you have this really high scarcity signals. And I think in Texas, maybe we have something like that. I'm not sure in detail aware of that. But in Europe, for example, what we can do is just assign some kind of capacity mechanism to that. We can finance energy storage in terms of paying some capacity-related benefits for just having this installed, and then let it operate. And the question is how much capacity should I subsidize? Because that's I think in a way a subsidy at the moment, but I'm not fully the expert in this area.
Thank you very much. Hi, Lydia, the colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mademoiselle. So, Martin, do you have a question for? Yes?
Yeah, hi. Max, thank you for the insightful presentation. It's an interesting approach. I was wondering, when I saw your scenarios, you want to come up with an approach that evaluates the market potential. So your idea, if I understood it correctly, is to look at different scenarios and then see which technology always remains within the optimal capacity mix, so to say. But I was wondering about your scenarios because they're specified to some modeling intricacies, right? Whether you have a fixed E to P ratio or variable E to P ratio, and the application or the applicability of some storage technology also depends on the constitution of the optimal capacity mix. So I was wondering, why do you look, why your scenarios refer to this modeling specifics instead of, for example, looking at a different capacity mix, right? One scenario with more PV and one with more wind.
I think that's, thanks, Martin. I think you spotted something really important. Maybe I forgot to mention it. The scenario selection we chose is not complete. What you should do in a best case is, for example, pick this ENTSO-E scenarios, which we think, people align their view on that ENTSO-E outlook, for example. They have 3 different scenarios, and I think if we could apply this methodology to this ENTSO-E scenarios, then we have this different views. And if I'm a storage developer, I actually should also consider maybe 3 different technology constraint scenarios. So at the end, we would 3 times 3 would end up with 9 scenarios in this case, to have this technology detail and differences, and then have also this kind of 3 realistic future scenarios or probable scenarios. Good spot, Martin, and thanks for asking that.
Maybe also relevant, since you mentioned the ENTSO-E, also the degree of interconnection in the future, right? I mean, there is clearly a competition between transmission expansion and storage expansion, because essentially it's like either temporal or spatial smoothing of renewable generation. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something you can play with. You can play with so many things in these models. But at the end, what I like, okay, another plane is coming, sorry about that. At the end, like the scenarios are always belief systems. And we have to see or assess different beliefs practically. And I think focusing on this ENTSO-E cases, maybe ENTSO-E can also improve by providing different, even more scenarios. But that might help to investigate the situations.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Martin, it's fine for you? Or you have other questions or discussions? No?
No, thank you. That basically answered my question. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Maddie.
So, so it's fine. If there is no new questions, we can move to the next presentation by Martin. So the second paper will be entitled "The Storage Cycling Trap, Unintended Effects and Implications for Energy System Modeling" by Martin Kittel of the German Institute for Economic Research, located in Berlin. So I give you the floor, Martin. Yes, we have time. You can share your slides with us.
I'm struggling, sorry, one second. I'm struggling a little bit with Zoom right now. Here we go.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So about 22 minutes, and Diego will tell you when you have only 5 minutes left.
Excellent. So, do you see my screen now?
Yes.
Perfect.
It works.
All right. Then I say, let's get started. Thanks for the warm introduction. I would like to elaborate on a very modeling nerdy specific topic, which is renewable energy targets and unintended storage cycling, a modeling artifact, and its implications for energy modeling. So this is my agenda. I'm first going to introduce the problem, the artifact, research questions, methods we used, and then elaborate on a few key results and conclude in the end. So let us dive right into it. What we see here is a simplified power sector model. And let me mention that again, it's a model. We're thinking now in energy modeling, in the energy modeling domain. We have a conventional generator, we have a renewable generator that potentially gets curtailed if there's excess electricity. We have a storage facility that incurs conversion losses when charging and discharging, and we have a demand, and of course the grid, which is represented by this thick, bold, like line here. So as I just mentioned, what we expect an energy model to do if there is surplus renewable generation due to beneficial prevailing weather conditions is to curtail this excess electricity. However, if we now impose a minimum renewable share of this form, as we see here, so total, for example, annual generation from renewables has to exceed a certain share of annual demand, what can happen is that we see unintended effects, and these effects are as follows. So since the model, due to this constraint, is inclined to drive up renewable generation, it may occur that it does not curtail the renewable surplus, but instead fed this excess electricity into the grid and then erase it via charging and discharging the storage unit within the same period, right? And this charging and discharging then creates additional unintended storage losses. So we define this phenomena as unintended storage cycling, which is again simultaneous charging and discharging of the same storage unit. And we consider this excessive because in the end, when you work with energy models, only the net effect of charging and discharging matters for the energy system balance. And again, this behavior only arises within energy models. So it's not a behavior that we see in out there reality, but only in our models, but it potentially occurs unintended effects, as we just did. So what are our research questions? Well, first of all, we would like to systemize possible ways to implement renewable share constraints. Second, we would like to investigate the effect of these different formulations on optimality conditions of storage operators in long-term equilibrium. This is not really discussed here due to time constraints, part of the paper. Third, we would like to quantify the effect of this modeling artifact on numerical model outcomes, namely on storage and remaining system elements. Would I like to identify drivers and in the end also solution strategies for the artifact. Are these questions relevant at all? Well, we believe they are because binding renewable targets are commonly used in climate policy. For example, in Germany, Germany foresees a 65% share of total consumption being from renewable energy sources by 2030, or most recently, the Biden administration announced the target of fully renewable power sector by 2035. And in order to investigate possible pathways for reaching these targets, numerical models are used both in the research domain, but also in policy consulting. So this artifact unintended storage cycling potentially distorts model outcomes and thus also policy recommendations, and we would like to avoid that. What we see here is also a selection of well-established German and European energy models. And I would like to highlight that in the past, there have been many applications that used a renewable, a binding renewable target. So it's these renewable shares, they are also commonly applied in the modeling domain. So let's move to our methods. We first of all looked at 12 different implementation strategies for binding renewable energy targets. We have first 4, let's call them constrained families. So what you could do if you want to impose a renewable target, you could say, okay, I require the model to have a minimum renewable share reference to total demand. Second, I could also say a minimum renewable share referenced to total generation. Third, and conversely, instead of requiring a minimum amount of renewable generation, you could also require or bound the maximum, bound the conventional generation, right? Impose a maximum conventional share, and then again, both in total demand or total generation. And for each of these constrained families, we look at 3 different variations, and these variations refer to the degree that renewable generators actually cover storage losses, right? We have, and this abbreviation is going to appear later on in the plot, so maybe you please try to keep it in mind. We have 0 SLCR, so 0 storage losses covered by renewables, right? Which essentially allows the model to completely cover storage losses by conventional generators. We have proportionate SLCR, which means we distribute storage losses among both renewables and conventionals according to the minimum renewable share. And third, complete SLCR, which means that all storage losses arising in the system have to be covered by renewables. And I want to highlight again, please try to keep in mind these variations. I'm not going to elaborate so much on the constrained families, but much rather talk about the differences that occur if you have a different SLCR level. We use a stylized numerical power sector model, which is essentially a reduced version of the detail model that we use here at the DRW. It depicts a power sector only for only one region, is a linear partial equilibrium model that essentially minimizes total system costs. And Max, thank you for this introduction on energy system modeling. So now you already understand how these kind of models work. We have just a very limited set of renewable generators and conventional generators and one storage technology, and the model optimizes both capacity and dispatch decisions for one target year. And we parameterize our setting loosely to the German power sector for 2030. So let's look now at actually at some model results. So what we see here are generation and price profiles for a setting where unintended storage cycling occurs and for a setting where it is actually prevented. So first, maybe let's look at this medical report again, where we say, okay, it occurs whenever we have simultaneous charging and discharging. And this is exactly what we see. So if we look, for example, at this period here, we see that there's both storage charging and discharging within the same period of time. Same happens, for example, also here, here, or there. If we compare that with the setting where unintended storage cycling is prevented, we see that there is either storage charging or discharging. So it does not occur simultaneously anymore. Aside from storage use patterns, what we also see is that other system elements are affected. So for example, looking here at curtailment of PV, the darker area, or curtailment of wind, also here the darker areas, we see that in a setting without unintended storage cycling arising, there is way more curtailment here in this period of time. Or also we see that the dispatch of, for example, coal technology occurs here in a setting where the artifact arises, whereas it does not occur here in a system where it is prevented. So we see that all system elements are essentially affected. Let's look at let's raise, one could ask, is unintended storage cycling an important artifact? Does it occur frequently? And as we see, well, at least in our stylized setting, it occurs in almost every 5th hour on average throughout a target year, if it arises. Yeah, so it is a frequently occurring modeling artifact. What we also see is that whenever we allow the model to cover storage losses, at least partly with conventional generators, so all models with 0 or proportionate storage losses covered by renewables, right? If we allow this, then unintended storage cycling arises. If we require, on the other hand, all storage losses to be covered with renewable energy, right? In these settings with complete SLCR, unintended storage cycling is prevented. This is the first major insight. What we also see, if we look at total system costs, which are minimized in these modeling frameworks, is that total system costs decrease if the modeling artifact arises. And let me try to elaborate on the reasons for that. We have, even though it's a very stylized setting, we have a number of complex effects that are somewhat amplifying and overlapping each other, but I'm going to try to highlight the most important ones here. So first of all, what do we see? Well, we see that renewable generation capacity decreases if unintended storage cycling arises. The same holds true for storage energy capacity. It also decreases in settings where unintended storage cycling arises. We see at the same time that generation from conventional capacities, here in this case coal, increases if unintended storage cycling arises. We see also that storage use, namely storage charging, increases. The dark areas down here, and storage discharging also increases areas up here if unintended storage cycling arises. So storage use in the end increases. And we also finally see that renewable curtailment decreases if unintended storage cycling arises, while storage losses increase. Okay, so far so good. And why is that now? Let's first look at this additional storage use that arises if unintended storage cycling occurs. And well, this is just the mechanism at work that I introduced at the beginning. Unintended storage cycling essentially converts curtailment into additional storage losses by increasing storage use, by charging and discharging the same storage facility within the same period of time. So this increase here is just due to the artifact, right? We convert curtailment into additional storage use, which then creates additional storage losses. So this is, for example, one effect. Then we have another effect. Whenever we convert intended curtailment into additional renewable generation, that then gets converted into additional storage use and storage losses, we have more renewable generation in situations where actually curtailment would arise. And since we have more renewable generation in these situations, we need less renewable generation in other situations. So in the end, since renewable capacity is costly, the model can achieve the renewable target with much less renewable generation capacity. So we also have a capacity effect. And because we have less renewable generation capacity, it is also optimal to decrease storage energy capacity there to some extent. What we also see is that we have an increase in conventional generation if unintended storage cycling arises. And why is that? Well, we have additional renewable generation, right? We convert curtailment into additional renewable generation, and then storage use, and then storage loss. And this additional renewable generation is useful in the sense of the renewable energy constraint, because we have more renewable generation, so we meet our binding renewable target there. However, this additional renewable generation gets immediately erased from the system via unintended storage cycle. So it is not effective for satisfying demand. And in order to satisfy demand, we then need more generation from conventionals to meet the system's energy balance. And let me mention also one more effect. Effectively, and this is a bit hard to elaborate or show, but effectively, these different variations, no storage losses are covered by, or zero storage losses are covered by renewables, or with proportionate distributed amongst conventionals and renewables, or we require storage losses to be completely covered by renewables. This effectively increases the ambition level of the renewable constraint, right? Here in these settings, the ambition level is lowest, and then it increases here up to here. So all these effects that I just presented are partially also driven by this different ambition level of the renewable constraints.
So, sorry, Martin, 5 minutes left of the presentation. Thank you.
Maybe one, it's not a key insight, but it's a consequence of this change in the generation mix, is that we have an increase in emissions. And given the context of binding renewable targets, which is to facilitate decarbonization, this is also an important insight that if the modeling artifact occurs, in the end, emissions in the system will rise. We conducted a large number of sensitivity analysis in order to see drivers, and let me present maybe just one sensitivity here. What do we see here? We see energy flows in a system with 80% renewables, or with in a fully renewable setting. And on the left-hand side, we have generation, right? Wind, PV, coal, gas, and then the electricity grid, final energy use, curtailment, and also storage use. And marked here in red are the additional energy flows due to the artifact. So these are the energy flows that we can directly attribute to unintended storage cycling, right? And here we have this unintended storage loss that converts some of the curtailment, that curtailment gets converted into. And what we see is that the extent of unintended storage cycling rises disproportionately for higher renewable shares, right? So as we move towards a fully decarbonized power sector, the artifact's impact actually increases. So what are possible solution strategies? As we already have seen, requiring in the renewable constraint that all storage losses are covered by renewable generators solves the problem. Yeah, that's very important. This is also our recommendation how to treat the problem. However, one needs to be aware that this is overly restrictive, right? This constraint then requires a little bit more renewable generation than the policymakers' notion of a renewable share actually requires, right? The policymakers, they say, okay, renewable share is like total renewable generation over all generation in the system, which then implies that renewable that storage losses also should partially be covered by renewables and conventionals. Here we recommend that all storage losses should be covered by renewables. There are also possible alternatives, and due to time constraints, I'm only maybe let me only discuss the CO2 versions. You could impose a CO2 budget or a CO2 price, and if storage use in energy models is priced, so if there are some costs attributed to storage use, then the modeling artifact does not occur anymore because the model has no incentive to drive up renewable generation. However, with such an instrument, binding policy, renewable policy targets cannot be modeled. So this is one major drawback of this alternative. Let me mention one more very important factor when departing from our stylized setting with the power sector only and moving to more sophisticated, full-fledged energy system settings, right? Where you also look at sector coupling options, for example. And what we see is that unintended storage cycling is essentially a special case of unintended energy cycling. So wherever in the system the chance arises to convert curtailment into additional losses, be that, for example, conversion losses for battery electric vehicles or standing losses for liquefied hydrogen, or even transmission losses in a multi-regional setting, the model will always be inclined to convert surplus electricity into these kind of losses to meet the renewable constraint at lower costs, right? So wherever unintended energy cycling is possible in these models, the artifact may occur and may distort also modeling outcomes. So to wrap up, what have we seen? We have seen that unintended storage cycling has a significant effect on modeling outcome, and implementation matters. We recommend that all storage losses need to be covered by renewable generators, which, depending on the scope of the model, might induce additional complexity or implementation complexity. And with this remark, I'd like to close my presentation and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Martin. So very clear presentation for a very complicated problem. Are there any questions? And quickly before asking a question or making your remarks. So it's time for questions. Yes, Rodika.
Thank you, Martin, for this very unexpected topic, because we usually avoid this simultaneous charging, discharging, so with the constraints, so I didn't expect to see how we treat this. But anyway, I would like to see how often in practice could happen, because I thought it's only one direction.
How do you mean in practice? In reality?
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether this occurs in reality. I don't. It's a modeling artifact, right? It happens within the model because the model is inclined to drive up renewable generation, right? So in the real world, where we in this modeling domain, we take the perspective of a social planner, right, who can optimize the entire system with, in this case, perfect foresight. In reality, we have individual business makers at play, right? Individual storage operators or power plant operators. And they don't really care about the renewable target. So I don't think that this is a modeling artifact that would arise, an artifact or misbehavior that also would arise in reality.
What I find interesting here is to value these constraints, because we don't even think what would mean. So it indeed to transform curtailment into storage losses. My remark is because I thought at the final slide, probably here, yeah, multi-regional settings, just a remark, in the French case, some PHS, so pumped hydro storage, there are 6 plants, big plants. Some of them are charging and some other are discharging in the same time over the year. If you see data, you can see that. So they have constraints, regional constraints with the operator. And this is why we can see this in practice. So I thought probably you have some units which are distributed and we can see this, but because it's not the same market they deliver. So I think it's valuable to see this at a national scale. So thank you very much.
Yeah, maybe allow me one comment. In the case that you just explained, I assume that you also considered the underlying grid infrastructure. And if you also consider the grid, and there is, for example, some congestion arising in the grid, then of course it may make sense that one storage on the one side of this congestion charges, while the other on the other side of the congestion discharges. So this could be a system behavior that is plausible and that makes a lot of sense. We are really talking about the same storage, for example, technology aggregate, as some models also depict technologies that the same unit or same aggregate charges and discharges within the same period of time. And this is then a behavior that is unexpected and unintended.
My final remark, I really appreciated your kitchen. I think that in that place, I couldn't mismatch salt and paper. So everything is organized and we can avoid this mismatch. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Radhika. Other questions? Yes. We have a few minutes left. So Maximilian, yes, please.
Yeah, thanks, Martin, for this wonderful presentation. I just want to strengthen like the point that actually in modeling, like Martin and me, like we're collaborating on this topic as well, like how to remove this effect in energy models. And I just want to say that we also in PIPESA Euro, we discovered this effect. And we counted, I think, 5,000 hours. I think you mentioned like some kind of 2,000 hours. We counted some 5,300 hours or something like that. So it's really something that can happen if you're not modeling carefully, and that can really distort your technology like behavior in a way. Yeah. That was just a comment for me. Thank you.
Okay, good. So maybe your collaboration for the next conference by Martin and Maximilian.
Pascal, are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, tell me, Diego.
It was just a lagged.
Okay. Yes. It's my connection. So I will give the floor to Lidia for the last paper of the of this session. This paper is entitled Digital Energy Transition, Diffusion of New Social Practices and their impact of the energy system, and located in Switzerland. Okay, so I give you the floor for this last presentation. And if you have a new question for Martin, you can of course, at the end of this presentation and after the question for Lidia, you can ask your question to Martin, of course. Okay, so.
Okay, thank you, Pascal. I'll try to share my screen now.
Yes.
Okay. It's work? It's fine? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. So I'm Lidia Stermieri. I'm a PhD student at the Porsche Institute in Switzerland. And today I will discuss with you what is part of my PhD topic. So it's about the digital energy transition and the disruptive effect of new social practices on the energy system. So let's start with discussing about what is digitalization. And the definition of digitalization is the increasing application of information and communication technology through the economy and society. We can see how the investment in ICT and the development of ICT increase the rate of adoption, and through the utilization and increase in the utilization of ICT, we have some behavioral changes in the population. And the behavioral changes affect what is called social practices that basically are the daily activity and the lifestyle of citizens. So this change in the social practices connected with the utilization of ICT also have some structural changes in the economy. For example, we can see how companies has to invest in new business model, moving from an analog business model to new digital business model. So all these changes also impact the energy consumption and the energy demand of several sectors. And so we have some implication for the energy system. At the same time, the energy system also has an effect on the development and the investment in the ICT. So with my framework, I want to analyze all these implications, linking together two different types of models. So we have one, the energy system model that is used to analyze the implication for the whole energy system, and is linked to a socioeconomic model that is able to analyze all the implication of the ICT development and use in the society and in the economy. So now we will discuss about these two different models, and we start analyzing how the agent-based socioeconomic model works. So we have two main type of agent. The first one is the households. So households use technology to perform social practices, and they change their preference and their behavior through the interaction with other households in their social network. To perform different practices, households has to use different technology. So in the model, there are different sectors that are simulated and modeled. So we have the transport sector, the residential sector, and the services sector. The second type of agent is represented by companies. So we can see how the social practices influence the digital business models of the company. Company has to modify their business model, adopting a new one, and at the same time adopting different business model, they can also enable the different practice for the population. So here we can immediately see how we will have a decision process for the households, a decision process for the companies, and how these two decision processes are connected through the social practices and the digital business model. The time period that the model is able to cover goes from the 2020 to 2050 and on an annual base, is dynamic over time, and includes different decision processes that we will analyze later. The output from this model are the impact on new social practice on the energy service demand, the rate of diffusion of technologies and practices, and the digital level of the society. So let's analyze the two decision process. So the decision process of households for social practice and technology adoption is based on the want to maximize the utility function. And the utility function is based on three main components. One is the preferences, one is about the benefit, and one is about the infrastructure development. Instead, the decision process of companies is based on the benefit. So the benefit is calculated as the evolution in the gross value added minus the evolution in the transition costs that are the cost to move from an analog business model to a digital business model for the company. Now let's start with discussing about the decision process of households. So the first component of the utility function is the preference. So basically there are households preferences and technology attributes, and we want to select the technology that better match the preferences of the households. So let's give an example on how this component work. If we want to analyze the preferences for households for the concept of environment, and we can see that we give to this household, he gives to the environment the maximum value, so 1, all the attributes goes from 0 to 1. And this this household has to select between two different technologies, so technology 1 and technology 2. These two technology has two different values for the attributes environment. And from the calculation of preferences, we see that for these households, the best technology that match his preference is the technology 2, where we have the highest values for preferences. The households' preferences change over time due to the social interaction. So we also simulate a social network in our model. Actually, there are two different social networks. One is the set of agents that are in the physical network of the agent I. So basically there is neighborhood. And the second network is the virtual network that basically simulate the network created through the social media. The agent is then able to change its preference and its behavior through the interaction with other agents following a social opinion dynamic. And the two main parameters for this interaction are the speed of preferences change. So each agent has a different adaptation to a new preference or behavior. And then, of course, there is also a trusting interval. That define when an agent decides to interact with another agent and also to change its preferences through this interaction. The second and third component of the utility function is represented by the benefit and the infrastructure component. The benefit component accounts for the budget of the households and also the annualized net present values for the technology that is defined considering the capex of the technology, the opex of the technology, the lifetime of the technology, and also the discount rate. Here we can immediately see the connection between the two models that I told you before, as I told you before, because all the information for the calculation of the annualized net present values came from are an input from the energy system model. We said also that there are different sectors simulated in the model. So we have the transport, residential, and services sector, and we can see, for example, how this sector interact through the budget, because the household's budget has to be distributed for different technology that belongs to the transport sector or to the residential sector. And in the end, we define also some deployment of infrastructure for the different residential sector. And when we model the transport sector, we include the infrastructure deployment as a society component, but we consider also the anxiety of each agents for the deployment of this infrastructure. So basically, this anxiety depends of how much also you need to use this technology. Then we can move to the decision process of the company that, as I said, is based on the benefit. And we have that the benefit is positive, or if the benefit is negative, but the willingness of the employees of this company to perform a practice is higher than a threshold value, then the companies decide to invest in digital business models, increasing its own digital level. Otherwise, there are no investment. This means that the practice is not allowed, and also the households has to change its decision process. So from here, we can see how companies account for the decision process of households, and at the same time, how the decision process of households is affected by the decision of the companies. To give you an example of the cost-benefit analysis for a company, we can think about, for example, the teleworking practice as a new social practice enabled by the diffusion of ICT. And in the transition cost from the analog to a digital business model, we consider the cost of ICT, the training courses for employees, the network infrastructure, the evolution of the energy cost, and the administrative cost. And it's also important that only sectors that can adopt a certain type of business models are considered in the analysis. So now that we explain how the socioeconomic model works, we can analyze the link between the two models. For as energy system model, analyzed energy models developed in the times framework, so it's an optimization model. We have that the output from the socioeconomic model, so the technology share and the energy service demand, are the input from the times model, while the output from the times models that are technologies cost, energy fuel cost, energy supplies, etc., are the input for the socioeconomic model. Now, the link between these two models is also an iterative process. So this means that these two models iterate until when the convergence tolerance is reached. And the convergence is analyzed for each sector, each demand at each time step. So this is how the links work. And now let's move to the analysis of case studies for Switzerland. And why Switzerland? So Switzerland has a net zero climate target for 2050. Wants to withdraw from nuclear energy and promote renewable energy resources and energy efficiency. At the same time, there are some challenges because Switzerland has to maintain a clean power generator sector, has to face some limited renewable energy resources, and has to assure a security of supply. As we can see from the graph, the main sector that needs to achieve a decarbonization are the transport, the residential, and the services sector. It's important to note that there is already a net zero scenarios for Switzerland that has been analyzed in the joint activity scenarios and modeling. And we can see that to achieve this net zero target in 2050, the system has to invest in solar PV, electric and hydrogen cars, heat pumps, energy saving measure, hydrogen, biofuels, synthetic fuels, or all the capture and storage CO2 technologies. But what we want to also analyze is the fact that Switzerland also has a digital strategy, and it recognizes as main point in this digital strategy the development of digital business model. They improve the digital empowerment of the population and the development of infrastructure. So the question is how to include this digital strategy in the net zero scenarios in order to include all the opportunities and challenges identified in the digital strategy. Furthermore, there are several favorable conditions for the digital transformation in Switzerland. First of all, because the 70% of the Swiss GDP is generated by the service sector, and Swiss firms are small and medium-sized enterprises. And also because there is a stable political system with attractive economic policy. So these are good bases to analyze really the opportunity that digital transformation can bring to the society. And some of them are, for example, that digital transformation can increase resources and process efficiency, but can also ensure the value creation, a growth, and a well-being. So we finally apply our framework for Switzerland, and I want to focus on two main points here. The first one is the huge set of databases that we use to initialize, calibrate, and validate the socioeconomic model. And as you can see, there are several surveys, technology data set, and a lot of statistics, and all these databases came from different fields of studies. So we are also able to integrate all these different sources of information in the socioeconomic model. The second point is that Switzerland already has Swiss time energy system model that is called STEM, and this is developed at the Polscher Institute, and that is able to represent the whole Swiss energy system with a high level of technology details, long time horizon, so over 2050, and a high temporal resolution, and is also based on a least cost approach. So now we analyze a case study to see how our framework works. So we apply to the net zero climate target one social practice, as we discussed before, for example, the teleworking practice. And we analyze this for three different scenarios. So there is a base scenarios in which we assume that people performing this practice, the teleworking, will work from home the 30% of their annual working hours, and the 30% of their meeting will be online meeting. Then we have a digital scenarios where this share goes up to the 60% of the annual working hours, and then a new world scenarios where the share is equal to the 100% of the annual working hours. And we want to analyze so the implication that this practice has on the business models for service sector and on the net zero climate target. So, discussing about preliminary results, we can see how the adoption of practice and the business models are related. So we have on the left the average digital level for the service sector, while on the right we have the share of the Swiss working population performing teleworking. As we can remember, the company decision process is connected with the household's decision process, and we can really see this on the graph. So first of all, we can analyze what is happening between the digital scenarios and the e-world scenarios. So we see that in the for the service sector, we reach a saturation around 2040, but if we analyze the share of the working population, we can see that in the e-world, the population performing teleworking increase. So this means that social network influence is able to maintain the growth in the teleworking after the saturation of the number of the company doing the practice. And this is our first conclusion. A second conclusion, instead, we can now analyze the difference between the base scenarios and the e-world scenarios, because as we can see, we are not able to reach the same digital level in the base scenarios, and also the share of the working population performing the practice is much lower. So from this, we can have as a conclusion the fact that the companies need to facilitate the spread of the teleworking practice in order to mobilize the working population toward this practice. So it's really important to have this analysis and this connection between the company's decision process and the household's decision process. So now we analyze only the base scenarios and the e-world scenarios, and we see what is happening to the energy services demand. So
Lidia?
in this service, yes.
Sorry, Lidia, yeah, you have 5 minutes left.
Okay, thank you, perfect. So in the service sector, we can see that the electricity for the service sector decrease in the e-world due to this moving to a digital business model. But, and this is the blue column, but if we consider the electricity demand that is connected to the internet data, the network infrastructure, and the data centers, we see how in a more digitalized scenarios, of course, we have an higher use of electricity for the network infrastructure. And in the end, we can see that in 2050, the digital scenarios will have a higher demand for electricity. So this also shows how important it is also to consider the electricity connected with the internet data, and the network infrastructure. We see then what is happening what happened to the transport sector, where we have a reduction in the demand for commuting in the e-world scenario, so connected to the teleworking practice. And in the residential sector, due to, let's say spending more time at home, we have also an increase in the heat and electricity demand in the residential sector. Of course, these are really small variations, this is clear, but we have also to consider that only one practice in this case is analyzed. But even if these are really small variations, we can see some implication for the energy system, and we can see this analyzing what is happening for the CO2 emission in 2050. So the first point is that we can see that in a digitalized scenarios, transport increase their emission. This is why this is connected to the fact that the agent choice is suboptimal from a system perspective. So the lower transport demand basically does not favor the renovation of the car's fleet if the clean technology are not supported. So the rate of penetration is lower. We can draw as a conclusion from this that the teleworking alone does not guarantee that there are less emission from the transport sector due to a reduction in the demand in the transport demand if the clean technology are not attractive. We can see then how the energy system react to this increase in the emission from the transport sector, and we can see that the energy system reacts reducing the emission in other sectors. So it shifts renewable resources from industry to reduce the emission in the residential and transport sector. But this and also increase the burden on the energy conversion sector to offset the emission. In the end, we also have that more zero carbon fuel are used in transport and residential sector, always to try to reduce the emission. But due to the limited resources of the country, this means that the system has to increase the import of these fuels, and this has as effect an increase of 1 billion francs in the year 2015 for as total annual cost. So to conclude, we can say that social practices and digital business models that impose obstacles or that help accelerating the energy transition need to be identified, and is important to include this analysis in the net zero scenarios. And yes, I thank you for the attention. And
thank you.
If you have any question, please feel free to ask.
Yes, if you have any questions, of course. So thank you, Lidia, for this wonderful presentation, including many things, a theoretical model, a case study in Switzerland with a net zero objectives, new social practices, digital implications of so many things. And Diego, you have a question for Lidia.
Yes, yes. Thank you for the presentation. I found really interesting, and I wonder if you have considered to analyze also the impact of these new uses of digital products in demand-side response from the households. I think like it will be interesting to assess how maybe a closer interaction between the digital products and or digital networks and also the energy system. And I think that goes along with electric mobility as well and the provision of VTG. And I think it has been like really stimulating the work, and that will be a point that I think it will be interesting to explore further.
Yes, you are absolutely right. So thanks for the comment. And this is, of course, one of the what you call practice that we will analyze, because exactly as you said, thanks to this model and this framework, we are really able to analyze better the preferences of the households and connect them with some business models that companies can provide. So absolutely yes. The only, let's say, not problem, but issues in this case is the data set that you need to have, because every time when you analyze, of course, preferences and you try to simulate social network and social interaction, you need to rely on a data set. So, and this is sometimes can be really complicated. So now we already include several data sets, and every time, let's say that we achieve or that we obtain a new data set, we are also able to include more practice. So this is the only, let's say, tricky point that has to be considered in order to improve the analysis.
And just one point, and these data sets normally are available in Switzerland. For example, so you are just finding data sets that you can.
No, I mean, it is, let's say that there are data sets, but they are not public. So you have to be part of a study or you need to buy a data set. It depends. And of course, depends also if the topic is of interest. So there are really some surveys connected to this topic or not, because otherwise you have to construct survey and to create your own data set, and it really requires a lot of time and effort.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions to Lidia, for Lidia? No, maybe I have one for you. We all know that teleworking is widespread because of the COVID crisis, and probably things are changed forever, even when the crisis is over. So the COVID maybe will accelerate teleworking again. So what do you think of it, Lidia?
I think that is true. I mean, let's say, I think that especially due to COVID, we saw how fast people can adapt to changes. So you can really change your working habits, for example, in a really fast way. So this is absolutely true. But it's also true that I would say the main point is if companies will allow to do the teleworking or not, because it also needs to be make sense from an economic point of view also for companies. So I will say that that's also a tricky question, because maybe they realize that it's better, I don't know, it's maybe make more sense from an economic point of view, do not have people doing teleworking. This is also something that has to be discussed, and I would say also depends on the countries. And yeah, but definitely we will really see some interesting studying coming up in the next years, probably thanks to the COVID situation. Say, not sure if you can say thanks, but it's connected to this COVID pandemic situation. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I fully agree. And I just have another question of understanding. Why do, in your theoretical model, why do households value infrastructure? Do they really pay for that? I say, I mean, do they realize it that they pay for infrastructure? So why do in your model households value infrastructure? That was the third
okay,
valuation.
so, okay,
in the utility,
thanks.
I mean.
I see. Okay, in this case, the infrastructure is a tricky point in the utility function. So this part here. Okay, basically, the infra is not connected with how much they have to pay for the infrastructure, but is if the anxiety provided by the fact that this infrastructure is available or not. So for example, if you think about electric car, you can really see that if you do not have the infrastructure, the households will not likely invest in an electric car because you feel that you cannot charge your car whenever you want. So this factor
that is a
tries to
relevant
simulate
example.
this.
Yes.
This is what it simulates.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions from the audience?
I have a question. Just sort of observation about the digitalization, that it's not, according to the result of your research, that it's not always positive for the energy system, and in particular to reduce the energy demand and to improve the energy conservation. What do you think about?
I think that, thanks for the question. Yes, I think that this is the interesting point, at least of this analysis, because most of the time we had one idea in mind, and then we through the analysis, we saw that we were wrong, and we try to understand why. So for example, this is absolutely true that we used to think that digitalization can improve how we are using energy. It can be beneficial for the energy sector. And I'm not saying that is not true. I'm just saying that there are different points that we have to analyze. So digitalization alone cannot be enough in some case. I mean, if we analyze digitalization to improve the efficiency of processes, that of course will help the energy system. But as I said, if we, for example, consider all the electricity that is connected with network infrastructure and data center, we really have to be careful on how we can also offset this increase in the energy demand. And the second thing that the analysis want to show is also that the agents, if we analyze households or population in general, they are not able to see the overall impact of the energy system. So in this context, we also have to consider that we need to lead them toward better choice in order to achieve the energy target or to help the energy system, because otherwise we risk a rebound effect, and we see that they do not make, let's say, the cleaner choice, and this is a negative impact, of course, for the energy system.
Thank you. Grazie.
Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions? Maybe one last question. Is it possible, Diego? Yes?
Yes, it's possible. Yes.
Yes. So it's good. It's a question for Martin and Maximilian.
Okay.
So I hope you are with us. Yes. So from your point of view and your own criteria, which countries are the most advanced in storage issues and energy storage in Europe, or maybe in the world? From your own criteria, of course. I mean,
so the question was related to which are most advanced in terms of storage, right?
Yes, it's not. Yes, it's related to the technology, of course, and other things. But if there are for you countries that are really advanced on that topic, and how do they work with that?
I think it's really hard to judge about that, because I think energy storage is actually mostly relevant when we have this high renewable penetration cases. So that's where we see, okay, we're not earning any money with renewables anymore. Maybe we should do some kind of time shifting, right? We have in some cases, yes, the usage for redispatch and or other cases where storage makes sense, also in sub-hourly cases to hold the frequency stable. So I think it's really hard to judge, okay, where's the one advanced. I think it really depends on the application, what we're talking about. But what we all see is now lithium ion storage catching up. Like I see this huge developments all the time, but they're not like the seasonal solutions. Everyone should be aware of that. It's just the kind of benefits which they provide for frequency response or something similar. And yeah, to say who's advanced there, I'm not sure. I'm just seeing all the time in LinkedIn a guy posting, okay, new lithium ion storage gigawatts or megawatts are installed around the world from Fluent Energy or something like that. So it seems this is like pretty. they're doing good.
Good. And yeah, maybe Martin.
Yeah, I'm also I'm not well aware of the dissemination of electrical storage technologies in every single country, so I cannot validly answer that question. But of course, there are prime examples, so to say. For example, if you, Max, you apparently have an interesting newsletter on LinkedIn. I have some newsletters that shoot me each week also information, and there's a lot going on, for example, in Australia. So in Australia, especially Southern Australia, they are really advanced in this coupling of home PV systems and then a smart battery storage. So there definitely a lot is going on. There's this Tesla wall that really rocketed a lot. So they are definitely well advanced. But I guess, I mean, storage, you know, like storage is, you could limit storage to electrical storage, but you can also think about other flexibility options, right? I mean, battery electric vehicles, for example, that's also one super relevant storage technology that will help integrating renewables for, as Max said, very high shares of renewables in the future. And it's definitely a technology that is worth investigating. Also being applied in Australia, but that's also well advanced, for example, in the UK. So I spent, I think in 2012, I spent some time in the UK, and I was surprised how many electric vehicles or hybrid electric vehicles already were there compared to Germany. But of course, battery electric vehicles are not equipped yet for recharging, for discharging into the grid, for vehicle to grid. So I guess there it also takes some time for both policymakers and industry to adapt. Yeah, and thinking of the old world, where we rather follow demand patterns instead of generation patterns, one could say that, of course, all countries with very high shares of hydro reservoir storage, right, that they were probably very advanced. Just a while ago, I was at Goldestal in Thüringen in Germany, which is one which has a power, I think a discharging and charging power of roughly 1 gigawatts and an energy capacity of 8 gigawatts. So for 8 hours, you could replace a, I don't know, like a nuclear power plant or so. And there was interesting to see because it was gigantic. It's just like a gigantic infrastructure project, but it delivered only 8 gigawatt hours, right? That's not really a lot. So in the future, we need a lot of decentralized small appliances, as Max said, right? Short-term battery and long-term some sort of hydrogen, probably. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. So a lot of questions and work for the future. Thank you to all. I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you to our 3 speakers, and thank you very much to Diego. So see you for next sessions on this conference. Bye-bye. We have to leave right now.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.